We're in a generation where seeing white male role models as the only role models is not going to cut it anymore. And people are demanding to see diversity. So it's not just a nice to have in business right now, it's a must have. So I'm going to talk about gender a lot in this because that's my specific area of expertise, but also because women are half the world's population. Women are not a minority. So if we can't get women up to speed in this world, can we really get anyone up to speed in this world? That being said, it's important to look at gender and to look at with what's called an intersectional lens. Now, an intersectional lens appreciates that we're a combination of different identities. So I'm not just a woman, I'm a white woman from Connecticut with an upper middle class family who was raised with a handicapped sibling. Those are all pieces of my identity, whereas someone else might be a migrant from West Africa who's an entrepreneur. That's a combination of her identities. So it's important that we do look at things with what's called an intersectional lens. So the thing is too, is that women are good for business. So if business leaders are ignoring this, it's going to negatively impact their bottom line. So study after study have come out since the early 2000s saying that if you have more women in your management positions as well as on your board, it's going to increase your stock prices, it's going to increase the value for your shareholders, and the overall profitability of the company. So why are there still more CEOs named John than there are female CEOs in the US? Oops. In addition, McKinsey did a study in 2015 that saw if there was gender parity in women in the workplace, we could achieve $26 trillion in the global economy by 2025. I'm sure everyone would like a piece of $26 trillion to add to their wallet. And ultimately, as business leaders, it's our responsibility to try to figure out how do we access that talent. This is forgotten, missing talent that could be accessed that would dramatically affect our global growth, and people aren't accessing it. Unfortunately, the World Economic Forum data actually shows that it will take 108 years to close the overall gender gap and over 200 years to bring about parity in the workplace. So that's pretty slow. So this is not something that's going to happen without concerted effort. This is not something that's going to happen without people diligently working on this, without business leaders and government leaders taking a stand and saying gender parity is something that's important to us and we need it now. You can see also how much. So women now are 56% of university graduates, and this is an average of 30 different countries. Check out what happens to them when they become for CEOs. 5%, from 56% of university graduates. And you can see it dipping and dipping and dipping and dipping. So something's happening when it comes to advancement of women to the top. They're not breaking through the glass ceiling, and there are institutional constraints, there's sexual harassment and discrimination, there's company cultures that are outright hostile. There's so many different things that need to be looked at in order to increase the number of women CEOs. So what's going on with the diversity and inclusion now? So there are diversity and inclusion initiatives at big companies now. What I've seen so far is that a lot of them come from people that were internal talent within the company, but don't actually necessarily have any expertise in diversity and inclusion. They're using exercises and activities that are not evidence-based and then don't necessarily drive things at all. And they're usually based under HR, and they're not at the decision-making table. They're again being treated as a nice to have, not a must have. They don't have any real leadership capacity to say anything. So the other big problem is that they're not necessarily getting the buy-in of people from the top. So someone's saying, okay, we should have a head of D&I, let's do that. But somehow these heads of organizations and companies are still escaping without knowing anything about diversity and inclusion, what it means and why it matters. So I just want to give you a brief anecdote from last week to illustrate this. I spoke at the Horasis Global Conference, which IE sponsored, on a diversity and inclusion panel. There was one man on the panel, and I was excited because I thought he was going to tell us a revolutionary story of how he transformed his company to being super diverse and promoted all these women. So he starts on this story, I'm still not sure why he was on this panel, and tells a story about how he trained a woman to take over his role as head of corporate banking. And she was loyal, and she was hardworking, and he really groomed her to be his replacement. And she was there for like 2 years, like trying to step into his shoes. But then 6 months before he left, they hired a hotshot who was kind of poached from another company. It was a young man. And he was really good too. So he was faced with this predicament. What do I do? They're both really good. Who should I promote? Now, to anyone who even doesn't really have a gendered lens, somebody who's loyal and has been there a really long time and has been waiting to move up, it would be the obvious choice. But for someone that has also a gender and an impact lens, you would say, wow, how many women in leadership position do we have at this firm? Wouldn't it be great to have women leaders, not just to set an example, but also for all of the business reasons, like linked to profitability that we just spoke about? So he says, I had a really hard decision to make, but ultimately I chose the guy. I just knew that he was going to do a better job. And then he made us lots of millions of dollars, and the woman left the company, and she's doing really well too. And the fact that this man, who was the head of a huge bank, told this story on an inclusion panel and somehow thought he was right in what he did shows how disconnected most heads of major companies are from diversity inclusion initiatives. And that was really kind of terrifying. And so what's really important is that this goes into the culture of a whole organization, and it starts at the very top. It's not just someone's job to do, it's from the top, and it's institutionalized, and everyone participates. So for women, I want to give some advice here to kind of wrap this up. So just for women, in terms of becoming women CEOs or even just rising in your career, just a few tips. I just did a article about how women actually, there's studies that show that women ask less questions at conferences. It's actually shown that women ask like disproportionately less questions than men at conferences. So speak up, raise your hand. Even if you don't know if what you're saying is totally on point, the guy next to you is probably going to stand up and make a really long-winded comment that's not even a question. And it would have been better off if you had just asked a question. So it's not about being perfect. Stand up for yourself. If men are putting you down, tell them off, because if you don't, no one's going to. Call out things like a panel. If you're the head of an organization here or a group, and you see that there's a panel that's all men, especially all women, even worse, say something. There's got to be a woman speaker on that topic. Do the digging yourself. Find the speaker. Say, here's a great woman who knows a lot about venture capital, and she's right here in Madrid. I'm sure she would love to talk. Do that digging. Support other women. We talked about intersectionality. Seek out leadership positions, which I know many of you are doing. Take advantage of all professional development programs, even if they're not perfect. And if there isn't one, a lot of gender equity initiatives start from someone within the company saying, hey, this doesn't exist, I'm going to create one. And then I like this one, is contrary to popular belief, don't always lean in. So there's actually a lot of research that women are more likely to take on thankless tasks that won't let them, that actually aren't promotable. So for example, organizing the holiday party at your company, or volunteering to take notes for a meeting, versus saying, no, actually I don't want to do that, and putting something on that's going to make you more valuable. Or taking on tasks of other colleagues because you feel bad. In my last role, I realized I was actually doing my job, and I was doing the guy's job who was higher level than me and making more money than me. And I was like, wait a second. And then I asked him for help one day on something that was his job, and he said, oh, I have a meeting with an investor, I can't help you. And I was like, but I'm doing your job. And then I realized, why am I doing this? This is not all my job. And I was only hurting myself. So it's also important that you delegate. Don't take on all these other colleagues' works. I know you want to prove yourself, but you also have to figure out what's going to get me to the next level. I also want to talk about microaggressions. So there's something called, there's hostile discrimination, there's harassment, but there's also microaggressions. So that's something that exists that can make people, that can deliver a toxic culture to the point where you can't stand it anymore, but on the surface, it's not much. So someone described it to me as it's like a little drop being put in your bucket. And at first it's just a drop, but then the drops add up and add up and add up and add up, and then all of a sudden the bucket's full and you can't take it anymore. And this is why a lot of specifically women leave companies. Meaning a remark, oh, you're being too sensitive. Hey, I'm gonna lead this again. You know what, you're not welcome in this WhatsApp group. We would rather have this alone. Little tiny things, not asking a woman, not listening to a woman when she's speaking. These types of little, what's called microaggressions, can add up. So these are things to watch out for as yourself and also as an ally. So for anyone, commit to not participate in microaggressions yourself. Please don't ever, especially tell a woman she's being too sensitive. It is just totally infuriating, and maybe ask yourself if you're being sensitive enough. Don't be a bystander. If you see stuff happening or people saying stuff that's not okay, call it out. There's actually links to, there's a college study where men who drank more than 3 times a week and also had friends that said hostile things about women were actually more likely to commit sexual assault. So people actually saying things actually does make a difference in people's actions. Educate yourself. Reject gender norms. Don't do things that are necessarily prescribed for you as a woman or a man. There's great implicit bias tests by Harvard that you can take for free to examine your own internal biases, like the thought experiment we just did. And then this is really important, disaggregate your data by gender and age. So whenever you're looking at data, whether it's in a case study or a marketing analytics of who your project reached, make sure it's disaggregated by sex. That's gonna make you better analyze your markets, and it's also gonna make you better analyze what exactly you're doing and how to target things appropriately. And then also advocate for inclusive practices within wherever you are. Whatever your role is, you can be the change that makes a company or a culture different. That being said too, it's really important that you encourage people at institutions not just to hire somebody who already has a job to do this as a side project because it's fun, but that this is a must-have. That this needs to be something that they devote resources to. That this is too big to not do. To include inclusive training, implicit bias training, look at promotions within the workplace. That's all must-haves. So I just want to ask you, the next time you close your eyes and envision a CEO, wouldn't it be nice to see a woman? Thanks.